In June of 1215, on a damp meadow at Runnymede beside the River Thames, one of the most famous documents in world history was not written, not debated in Parliament, and not triumphantly signed by a king. It was sealed, and that detail matters. Because Magna Carta did not begin as a grand declaration of liberty for all mankind. It began as a desperate peace deal between a failing king and a group of armed nobles who were ready to force his hand. The charter is dated 15th of June 1215, when King John accepted its terms under the threat of civil war. By this point, John had made himself deeply unpopular. He had lost huge territories in France, especially Normandy, and then tried to recover them through costly warfare. To pay for these failures, he pushed heavy financial demands onto his barons. The result was fury, rebellion, and finally, open resistance. When the rebel barons seized London in May 1215, John's position became dangerously weak. So the two sides met at Runnymede between Windsor and Staines and hammered out a settlement. What emerged was Magna Carta, the Great Charter. It contained 63 clauses, and most of them were not abstract philosophical statements. They were practical, even technical. They dealt with debts, feudal payments, inheritance, local justice, royal officials, and the limits of arbitrary taxation. It was less a medieval human rights manifesto than a long list of complaints aimed at forcing the king to obey agreed rules. And here is something many people do not realize. King John did not sign Magna Carta. Medieval kings authenticated documents with their seal, not a signature. That is why historians speak of the sealing of Magna Carta, not the signing of it. Another surprise is just how radical one of its clauses was. Clause 61, sometimes called the Security Clause, allowed a committee of 25 barons to monitor the king and, if necessary, legally compel him to comply, even by seizing his castles and lands. Imagine a document so bold that it effectively gave nobles permission to wage lawful war on their own monarch. But the peace did not last. Within weeks, Magna Carta was collapsing. John appealed to Pope Innocent III, who annulled the charter, calling it invalid. The agreement had barely begun before England slid back into war. In its first form, Magna Carta was a political failure, and yet, history did not let it die. After John's death in 1216, the charter was reissued in revised forms by his son, Henry III, and again in later years. Over time, people began to remember not just the barons' grievances, but the larger principle buried inside the document, that the ruler was not above the law. That is why one line became so famous, that no free man could be imprisoned except by the lawful judgment of his equals and by the law of the land. In 1215, that protection applied to a limited group, not everyone. But in later centuries, its meaning grew far beyond what either King John or the rebel barons had imagined. Today, only 4 original 1215 copies survive, but the legacy of Magna Carta is much bigger than parchment. It helped plant an idea that would echo through English law, constitutional thought, and democratic movements across the world. So when Magna Carta was sealed in 1215, it did not instantly create freedom, but it did something almost as important. It forced a king to admit, however unwillingly, however briefly, that even he had limits.